This video covers a couple of July sessions attempted to catch Gilthead bream in Langstone Harbour. The first session is from a mark on the Hayling Island side and the second on Portsea Island. In shallow water I generally prefer to use long snuds, so the first rig I've cast out is a long snud SHEPPEY rig. For long snuds give the bream some time to take the bait before they bolt off. They are hard fighting fish and will quickly snag you, particularly if there's plenty of weed about, so sometimes I have to change tactics and use much shorter snuds. I hadn't decided on which rig to use on my second rod, but then I noticed quite a lot of activity close in. Fish were splashing in the margins and I couldn't resist a go to try and catch them. So before putting on a proper rig, out came a small metal lure to see if I could catch on that. A stiff 15-foot rod is hardly ideal for the job, but I couldn't resist having a go. The fish were likely to be small bass and can be caught on lures if you do it right. Ideally I'd want to use an LRF rod with small plastic lures. This works well in a number of venues like Southampton Water, where we've got a similar situation with fish in the margins. After a few casts I decided the metal lure is not an option here, so I'll give up on that. However, I lodged this experience, and the next time I come on this side of Langstone Harbour I may well bring a small lure rod with me. A quick pan round the first mark, which is at West Lane, then a look at the gear that I've decided to use. The long snud SHEPPEY rig has size 3 hooks baited with ragworm. By contrast, the other rig I've opted for is a short snud tube boom rig. This has size 12 hooks to 8 pound fluorocarbon and is a good choice if getting loads of little knocks from small fish which you have difficulty hitting. And I've been told that there's plenty of small fish in this area. And, to my annoyance, the other thing that there's plenty of are wasps. I had already moved my gear once, thinking that I had set up on a wasp's nest. However, they seem to have followed me. More about the wasps later. As I'm preparing to cast out, I run through the locational details. First with a regional setting. For those who don't know, Langstone Harbour is on the south coast, east of Southampton Water. It lies between Portsmouth Harbour and Chichester Harbour, and more specifically, Portsea Island and Hayling Island. Working west to east, I'll run through some of the nearby venues. The eastern arm of the Solent has some well-known marks, and you've got Southsea and Eastleigh on Portsea. Hayling has East Oak Corner and Sandpoint, whilst east of the entrance to Chichester Harbour, you've got the Bracklesham Bay and Southsea marks. Homing in on Langstone Harbour itself, I'll run through some of the better-known fishing marks. I'm identifying them clockwise, but of course these are shore marks. Those with small boats and kayaks will know of other areas. I'll zoom in on the two areas that I fished for this video. The first venue is accessible from a public footpath off a hairpin bend on West Lane itself. The second mark is on the other side of the harbour. The People's Memorial is on the northern part of Milton Common and south of Eastern Road, where you can find sun parking. I've pinpointed the precise spots that I've fished. Just as I've cast out, I get stung on the palm of my hand. Fortunately, my camera's mic didn't pick up my comment. And yes, it did hurt. There are wasps all the way round my gear, and every time I put on fresh bait, they home in on that as well. They seem to particularly like the juices coming out of the ragworm and they're swarming on that. Some of that gets onto my hands and the rod, so the wasps are going for those areas as well. First bite is a little knock on a SHEPPEY rig. I've connected and I immediately know it's not very big. It's a little Schoolie and it's smaller than the ones that were splashing close in earlier. get an immediate bite on recasting and I strike into that. However, it's not a fish that comes out, but a shore crab. I'm not bothered about handling these. A net from one of these is nowhere near as bad as a sting from one of those wasps. It didn't take long for the next little bite. Another little schoolie on the bottom snood. A recast and get another couple of little taps straight away. Now one on the top snood. I'm using a pop-up bead here, so there's a slower fall of the bait. plenty of little fish about, and I've hardly got time to sit down till I get the next little rattle. Most of the bites are coming to the SHEPPEY rig. A double shot this time, a slightly better Schoolie bass. Before I could recast this rod, there's a bite on the other one. And it's a double shot to the clip down rig, although these Schoolies are a bit smaller. Now, this might just look like an unfortunate miscast which leads to a crack off. However, a couple of wasps were sitting on my hand at the time, so that disturbed me a bit. I jerked the rod whilst casting and the rig snapped off. I'm now focusing on the single rod before resetting up the other one. A couple of taps and decide to strike. Although it's a small fish, this feels a bit different. A bit more of a lively tussle, and the end result is what I've come here for. By no means a specimen, but I'm always pleased when I catch a Gilthead bream. In my opinion, they're gorgeous looking fish. tide is ebbing properly now, and it's time to move the kit. Hopefully those wasps won't move with me. Unfortunately, that didn't make any difference. The wasps are still around me. Despite the wasps, I persevered for a bit longer. I was still getting bites, but I was now missing quite a few. In summary, this was a busy session which ended up with 11 Schoolie bass and that Gilthead bream. I can't say it was enjoyable though, since most of my time was worrying about getting stung a second time. Spurred on by catching that Gilthead, the following day I decided to fish the Portsea side of the harbour. Although I don't normally use a baiting needle, it's an exception here. Because of a large number of small fish and missed bites, I decided to use one of my tube boom rigs. They've got size 12 hooks to 8 pound fluorocarbon and sometimes difficult to thread on the worms properly. With these smaller hooks, the baiting needle helps here. Should you be interested in how I make these tube boom rigs, I've got a tutorial which is linked in the top right hand corner and in the description for this video. They really come into play when you get loads of tiny little knots which you can't normally hit. While setting up my second rod, I'm thinking about the rig which I'm going to use on that. Since the tube boom rig is really for the smaller fish and tiny baits, I'm going to fish the other rod with a slightly bigger ragworm. So I'm thinking about using a short snood SHEPPEY rig with slightly larger hooks, this time of chino style. I generally find that these are better than Aberdeen style hooks for fishing for bream. Quick look round this venue, my gear and the rigs. I've arrived just before the top of the tide and have set up right at the water's edge. There seems to be a lot more weed here than at the previous venue, so this is one of the reasons why I've opted for short snood rigs. Longer snoods give the hard fighting giltheads more time to snag you in that weed. The SHEPPEY rig has size 6 and size 8 Camasan P983 wide gape hooks. I've noticed what I think is a sandbar about 80 yards out, so I'm trying to cast just over the top of that. As you can see, there's a little bit of a breeze into this side of the harbour, and that's taking the edge off the heat. There's hardly any tidal pull, and I'm sure I could have got away with much lighter rods. One good thing though is that there doesn't seem to be any wasps around. That looked like a knock to me. After dragging the rig, my right hand rod bounced round and then a slack liner. Unfortunately, my camera was on standby mode as I was playing the fish, but the result was exactly what I was looking for, a decent sized Gilthead bream. You might not look it by the way I'm holding it, but it's well over 1.5 pounds. As I'm casting, notice that flagpole behind me, that's the People's Memorial. The tide's receding now, and I've still only had that one indication and one fish. It was a lot busier on the other side of the harbour, but I didn't get into anything decent there. I get my second bite, and I think I'm into a fish. I feel something run into the weed and snag me. I managed to pull through the weed, but if there was a decent fish on, it's come off. There is, however, a small schoolie within that weed, but I don't think that's what I had on earlier. I think I had a double shot, with a bigger fish coming off as it weeded me. get my third bite, but I know this is just a small fish. This is like the size of the fish I was catching on the other side. Time to call it a day. I must have got a bite as I was packing away the other rod. Anyway, this is Schoolie number 4. So, although it didn't seem to be prolific as compared to the other side of the harbour, I'm still pleased with today's result, as I know that there's some decent Giltheads to be had. I've fished other parts of the harbour in the past, and I will be exploring more for a future video.